Go ahead and be seated. So our gospel reading today has two stories in it. The woman who was healed by reaching for the hem of Jesus' garment, and the healing of Jairus' daughter. And in this reading, there are lots of different people. So I'm going to say a little bit about each of the people in the story, and I want you to listen to their description and ask yourself, who do I identify with most? So first we start with the great crowd, this large crowd that's gathered around Jesus, starting all the way back at the sea. And they followed him, they pressed in against him, and they wanted to be close. They were at the start of the story, they were following Jesus to Jairus' house, and wherever Jesus was, there was a crowd. Some of these people were true believers and avid followers, and just wanted to see what Jesus was doing. But some were watching with curiosity, and maybe they weren't quite sure what was going on. Who is this guy? What is his message? And what does any of it have to do with me? You have Jairus. He was an important man in the synagogue. He's a leader. And we know that by this time there was already a scuffle that was happening around the leaders in the synagogue about who Jesus was and what he was doing. And so they would look upon Jairus with a little bit of suspicion, knowing that he was going out to meet Jesus. But he was more desperate than he was concerned about what others thought. He needed a miracle, and so he risked faith. We have the woman. She was sick and had been bleeding for a very long time. The woman was considered unclean, and because she was unclean, anyone that she touched would become unclean. She was supposed to stay outside the city and really secluded. So anybody that she touched that became unclean, to become clean again, they'd have to stop whatever they're doing, go and have this really long ritual that would make them clean again. So her being in this crowd would not be appreciated by anybody. But she persisted, and she pushed into the crowd. She didn't ask for permission. She just needed to be healed and just reached out. She believed. She said, I will be well if I can just touch his garment. She had great faith, and with great risk, she was willing to break the rules to get the help that she needed. We have the disciples, and as usual, they're focused on the wrong stuff. They are with Jesus. I mean, they're in the thick of it. They've been traveling with him for a long time. They're being pushed on by the crowds. But the disciples don't really understand. When Jesus feels the healing come out of him, he asks, who touched me? And the disciples, they don't get it. And they look at Jesus and they say, what are you talking about? Everybody's touching you. Look at this crowd. They don't take the time to understand what is happening, and they don't ask questions about what is happening. They just jump to the conclusion that they know what Jesus is asking, and they jump to the conclusion that they know the answer. And they didn't. They're close to Jesus, but they don't always know what's going on. We have Peter, James, and John. So they're among the disciples in the crowd, but they seem to have a special relationship. When Jesus presses on to go to Jairus' house, he only takes these three, Peter, James, and John. These three were also present at the Transfiguration, and they were also present at the Garden of Gethsemane. So wherever Jesus went, these three were there. They seem to be the guys who get it. It doesn't mean they're perfect. I mean, they did fall asleep in the garden, and Peter sticks his foot in his mouth like all the time. But these three were always very close to Jesus and definitely followed him very closely. We have the people at Jairus' house, right? So they're crying and mourning the death of the little girl. And when Jesus asked them why they were crying, they laughed at him. They knew it was too late, and they thought that hoping for anything else was just fanciful thinking. It was hopeless. Wanting or expecting anything more was just a waste of time. And finally, we have the caretakers of the little girl. Once the little girl had been healed, Jesus tells the people to give her something to eat. These people, they were there before Jesus got there. They were with her when she was sick. They were taking care of her. And now that she was healed, they served her. They made sure she had what she needed. So what I want to ask you is, who are you in this story? Are you the onlooker who is trying to figure out who Jesus is and what this all means? Are you someone like Jairus or the woman who needs the touch of Jesus so much that you're desperate to have it? And maybe you're like Peter, James, and John, and living the life with Jesus at the very center, and you want to follow him no matter where it leads. And perhaps you're like the crowd at the house of Jairus, who's too hesitant to hope that the church stuff or this Jesus stuff really changes anything. Maybe it just seems too unlikely to be true. And finally, perhaps you're like the caretakers who make sure that those in need have what they need. You feed the hungry and you care for the needy. We are all in the story. If none of these personas fit you just right, ask yourself, where am I in my journey with Jesus? And I guarantee you that there's somebody in that crowd with a similar story. I'm just sure of it. And I think that one of the most assuring things is that we don't all have to be Jairus or the woman who reached out for the hem of Jesus. From a really early age, we are trained to look for the protagonist in the story and say, oh yes, I need to be just like her or just like him. So in this story, we read it and we say, I have to have the faith of that woman, or I have to have the faith of Jairus. And for sure, having that kind of faith is great. And there are many times in our life that we do, but sometimes we don't. And the consequence of reading narratives this way can often make us feel left out. We feel left out of the story. We say things like, I should have the faith of that woman, but I just don't. And then we have guilt or shame or just feel left out or disconnected. The reading of this pericope and only looking for the hero is misplaced. What we need to see is that all of these people are in the story. They're all part of what Jesus is doing, and they each have their own role in the story, and each are on their own journey. Our lives are full of ups and downs, and there are times that we'll be so desperate for God's touch that we will push through our fears to reach out for that divine connection. And there are other times we're more like the crowd, just trying to figure out what all of this means. The important thing to know is that no matter who you are in this story, you belong. You belong in God's story, and you belong here at St. Clair's. At Epiphany, my old church, each week we would say, no matter where you are on your spiritual journey, you have a place here at Epiphany. And I can't tell you the number of times that people said how important that was for them and how powerful it was. It's one of the things that attracted them to Epiphany. And I think it was just comforting for people to know that they didn't have to have all of the answers to belong. You could be super spiritual, or you could just be wanting to ask some questions. Or maybe you just wanted to listen to the music or participate in outreach. It didn't matter. If you showed up, you had a place there. And we meant it. It is the meaning of the gospel. You belong, no matter what. And so, I want to say this here. No matter where you are on your spiritual journey, you have a place at St. Clair's. Whether you see yourself in the crowd seeking to understand, or in the shoes of Jairus or the woman, desperate for Jesus' touch, remember this. You are part of God's story, and you belong here. St. Clair's is a place where people care about each other. And it is a place where people are valued and matter to the community. We are a place where people can find connection, support, and a realization that God's work is alive. Everyone has a place, and together we will journey through this life, finding our place in the story.